The UN Security Council held an emergency closed-door meeting on Monday to discuss the latest escalation between Israel and Palestinian Islamic Jihad group in the Gaza Strip. The development came just a day after Egypt brokered a ceasefire between the two sides, bringing an end to nearly 3 days of intense fighting. Speaking virtually at the meet, the UN Middle East envoy warned that a resumption of hostilities will have devastating consequences in the region, and that the Egypt-brokered truce deal is currently at a very fragile state. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad members have already warned that they will not adhere to the ceasefire deal until their high-ranking commanders are freed. Meanwhile, the Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid has lauded the country's military operation, saying that the troops have achieved all their goals during the 3 days of clashes.
In Operation Breaking Dawn, Israel reclaimed initiative. It restored Israel's deterrence. All our goals were achieved. The entire senior military command of senior Islamic Jihad in Gaza was successfully targeted within 3 days. The strength and ingenuity of the Israel Defense Forces landed a devastating blow to the enemy.
Gaza's sole power plant has also resumed operations as Israel began reopening crossings into the territory. Fuel trucks from Israel have now resumed their deliveries in Gaza, thus ending a severe shortage of crude supply in the Palestinian enclave. Israel launched the operation they call Breaking Dawn on August 5th. The Israeli forces killed the PIJ leaders, Khalid Mansour and Tehsir al-Jabari, during the strikes. The entire operation was planned after Israel, on August 1st, arrested the senior PIJ leader Bassam al-Sadi from the West Bank. An aide to Sadi was also arrested in the raid, and a 17-year-old was also killed. Gaza officials say that at least 44 Palestinians, including a number of children, have been killed in the latest unrest. A number of Israelis have also been injured in the cross-border fighting. For more details, our correspondent Jody Cohen is now joining us live from Renana. Jody, thanks for joining us. What can you tell us about what was said at the UN Security Council emergency meeting on the Israel-Gaza violence?
So Israel certainly came in for some criticism at the UN Security Council emergency meeting on the Gaza-Israel violence on Monday. And Israel's ambassador to the UN has accused the UN of double standards. For example, he said that when the al-Qaeda leader was killed recently, the UN Security Council supported it. Yet when Israel killed the Islamic Jihad commander, the UN expressed deep concern. Israel did, however, express praise for Egypt's President al-Sisi and his mediation efforts with Islamic Jihad. Egypt, however, criticized Israel, talking about the number of martyrs killed, talking about the desecration of Al-Aqsa, and a need to end the Israeli blockade. Now, what's interesting is the Egyptian ambassador didn't mention that Egypt also has a border with Gaza and has its own blockade on Gaza. So different messages being said publicly to what's being said potentially behind closed doors there. The US ambassador to the UN also urged countries not to jump to conclusions. For example, she said that Israel was blamed for a strike on Jabalia that killed civilians, and said that it now appears that that strike was actually caused by an Islamic Jihad rocket that fell short. Reminded everyone that Islamic Jihad is a designated terror group and an Iranian proxy that targets civilians, and said that Israelis and Palestinians equally deserve to live in safety and security. Now, the Palestinian ambassador to the UN, he called it an unprovoked and unjustified aggression by Israel against the Gazan people, and said that the real reason for the fighting was the Israeli elections coming up.
Right, Jody, just to follow up to that, do you think the reason behind the fighting was actually the upcoming Israeli election?
So Israel says that the reason behind the fighting was actually to prevent an imminent terror attack that they said they had intelligence on. They got Egypt involved in mediating, which at the time wasn't successful. And then Israel closed the roads for the people around the southern communities, which meant that they couldn't really leave their homes, they couldn't go anywhere, couldn't go to work, which would be a deeply unpopular thing to do if the reason for it was just for an election. People are also saying that to start a conflict before an election is actually a risky move. Something could go wrong if it had led to a full-blown war. There could have been soldiers on the ground, which again would have been deeply unpopular. Some people are saying that Lapid does look more statesman-like and that it certainly gave him the security credentials that he lacked before. And as a whole, the Israeli people feel that he handled the last few days well, and President Biden praised his leadership throughout the crisis. However, polls this morning, there are 3 separate polls showing that there has not been a bump in the polls for Yair Lapid. He's known for his support of the two-state solution. He's a centre-left politician. The IDF is considered apolitical, and actually Lapid and Netanyahu both gave expressions this morning talking about how everyone's united when fighting terrorism. It's also, I think, too early to say that this could have been a factor in the election. The elections are not actually happening until November, and a lot can happen between now and then.
Right, Jody, thanks so much for all those inputs, and thanks for joining us on WION World is One at this hour. WION World is One is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.